Hello, Mike here from MikeOverlanding. If you have seen my YouTube video titled Jeep Gladiator Rubicon 2-Year Review, you know that one of the frustrations I have with my Jeep Gladiator is with the low miles per gallon and the small 22-gallon fuel tank. When I say low MPG, what I am referring to is the difference between what I'm actually getting in miles per gallon versus what the manufacturer says I should be getting in miles per gallon. I expected my actual results to be lower, but not that much lower. For example, in my video, I show the dashboard reading at an average of 13.8 miles per gallon, and it's even gotten lower than that. And that's with normal city highway driving. Jeep says I should be getting on average 19 miles per gallon, 17 in the city and 22 in the highway. So, why such a large difference? And is there anything I can do about it? I decided to investigate it. As I pondered why I have low miles per gallon, I came up with a list of these potential variables. Number 1, driving habits. Are my driving habits causing it? I think it's possible, I wouldn't rule it out, but I really don't think it's likely. I have had no accidents, I don't have speeding tickets, I pass people on the highway and people pass me. Number 2, cold weather. Can 20 degrees to below zero or colder have an effect? I don't know. I've never heard of such a thing, but it does get pretty darn cold here in Minnesota. Number 3, remote start. I do use the remote start from time to time. I don't use it in the morning because I keep my Jeep in the garage, but when I come home from work or I'm out, if it's really, really cold out, I will use the remote start, not necessarily for my personal comfort, but just to get the engine going before I hop into it. And I don't abuse it. I don't let it run all that much. So number 4, winter blend of gasoline. I don't think so. At first I put this on here, but as I learned throughout this video, winter gasoline would not be a factor. The change in winter blend of gasoline is essentially, if they put ethanol into your gas, in the winter they put less ethanol. Number 5, traction. There hasn't been snow here, and there hasn't been ice, and I haven't had it in 4-wheel high. It's always been in 2-wheel high, so I don't think that's an issue. 6, any towing or carrying heavy loads. Nope, haven't done any of that. Number 7, type of terrain. Nope, nothing there. Just my daily drive, a combination of highway where it's 65 miles per hour and some city driving, but nothing unusual. And the last one, number 8, was does ethanol have an effect? And I wonder about that. I've heard of things in the past that ethanol may decrease your miles per gallon, so I'm thinking maybe I should look into that. Then I remember driving from Minnesota to Utah and back less than a year ago on a trip to Moab, and I've got a number of videos out there on that. Check out MikeOverlanding if you're interested. And I went through Minnesota, I went through Iowa, Nebraska, and Colorado, and it seemed as though I was getting better gas mileage outside of Minnesota. The first thing I needed to do was to investigate whether ethanol blends varied by state, and specifically if there was a difference between Minnesota and those 4 other states. I found an online article from bellperformance.com which states the first difference is that not every state has a mandatory ethanol blending law. Currently, there are only 6 states that do have a mandatory ethanol law like this: Florida, Hawaii, Minnesota, Missouri, Oregon, and Washington State. Also goes on to say, Minnesota ethanol is exempt from the gas used in aircraft, watercraft, motorsport racing, collector vehicles, off-road use, motorcycles, 2-cycle, and small engines, etc. The law does not guarantee the availability of unblended gasoline, which must be premium unleaded, and it only allows retail dealers to supply it if they follow strict guidelines. I obtained this information on February 14th, 2022. It does not list the date it was published, so I don't know if there are still just 6 states or not. However, there is a Q&A section going from September 10th, 2012 to June 16th, 2021, and they haven't taken it down. So my guess is that this is a 2012 article, and there may be more states by now, And the most recent information is less than a year ago, the most recent reply to a question. And they haven't taken it down, so I suspect it's fairly reliable. Also, I found an article from Magnus Sellen. If you are living in the Midwest, you likely have a variety of fuel stations to choose from that include ethanol options. However, that isn't the case in some parts of the country. While gasoline is located at every fuel station, ethanol can be harder to find. If you want to fill up and go without searching out the right location, gasoline is the best option. Clearly, every state is different, and the states that I have traveled through appear to not have ethanol in their gasoline, and I purchased non-ethanol blended gasoline when I was going through those states. What are my motivations? Number one, not having to stop for gas as often. I'd like to be able to go farther on a tank of gas. Two, I'm fine helping the environment. I want to do my part, and whatever I can do within reason, I'll do. Of course, we should look at a cost-benefit analysis to determine whether it's worthwhile or not. Number three, no financial harm to corn farmers. I want to see the farmers be held harmless, and I don't want to have them lose any money. Number four, I like to pay less in fuel costs per mile traveled. Here is what my research into ethanol blending revealed. I found 8 different considerations. Number one, fuel efficiency, better fuel economy. Which is better, gasoline or ethanol? First quote I want to show you in my research is from Magnus Sellen, and he says, gasoline is known to produce more energy than ethanol. Because of this property, gasoline will help a vehicle create its maximum horsepower rating. In fact, a gallon of standard gasoline produced 1/3 more energy than a gallon of ethanol, which is quite a stark difference. By blending gasoline and ethanol at 85-15%, which is E85, the fuel becomes 30% less powerful. He also says, if you are hoping to get the maximum fuel economy rating out of your vehicle, you will notice better performance from gasoline. Because ethanol requires more energy to burn, your vehicle will have to work harder. The result is fewer miles per gallon with each tank of ethanol. In fact, you can expect to receive between 15% and 20% fewer miles per gallon with ethanol versus gasoline, which is exactly what I believe is happening. He also writes, most cars were designed to work with gasoline. With a perfectly running system, you can expect to get up to 27% more mileage from gasoline than you can from ethanol. Yes, you may spend less on ethanol while at the pump, but you might also be filling more often. In the long run, you may actually save money using traditional gasoline instead. And I do a little math here, and I see what he's talking about based on the prices of fuel here this week. Another point by Russell Hubish, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name right, I'm sorry, but he says E85, for instance, reduces fuel economy by 7 to 8 miles per gallon when compared to gasoline, according to the Environmental Protection Agency. He also mentions that ethanol has 34% less energy than gasoline per gallon, which equates to about 2 to 3 miles per gallon for E10, 10% ethanol. Keep that in mind, 2 to 3 miles per gallon difference. That's what I'm going to do a little math on and see what that comes out to be a little bit later here. Also, the Department of Energy lists ethanol contains about 1/3 less energy than gasoline. So vehicles will typically go 3% to 4% fewer miles per gallon on E10 and 4% to 5% fewer on E15 than on 100% gasoline. That is just amazing. So far everything is in favor of fuel efficiency. Also have an article from the Department of Energy. It says, due to ethanol's lower energy content, flex fuel vehicles operating on E85 get roughly 15% to 27% fewer miles per gallon than when operating on regular gasoline, depending on the ethanol content. Dan Edmonds has an interesting article where he performed a test where he drove from San Diego to Las Vegas and back in an E85 vehicle. He had the gas tank removed and emptied, and he put just E85 gas in there. Then he drove to Las Vegas and filled up again with E85 and drove back. Then he did the same trip on regular gasoline, and his results were amazing. First of all, Dan quotes an Avalanche owner that says, The mileage sucks. On gas, I can get 18 miles per gallon. On E85, I get like 12. Dan Edmonds also says, on a trip from San Diego to Vegas, the fuel economy of our Tahoe on E85 under these conditions was 26.5% worse than it was on gas. Motorists filling up and comparing the prices of regular gas and E85 might see a price advantage of ethanol, in our case 33 cents or 9.7% less, as a bargain. However, since fuel economy is significantly reduced, the net effect is that a person choosing to run a flex fuel vehicle on E85 on a trip like ours will spend 22.8% more to drive the same distance. For us, the E85 trip was about $30 more expensive, about 22.9 cents per mile on E85 versus 18.7 cents per mile with gasoline. The winner, resoundingly, is gasoline. There is no evidence whatsoever that I could find in favor of ethanol. So fuel efficiency, better fuel standards, goes to gasoline. Number 2, engine fuel system protection. Which is better, gasoline or ethanol? Again, a quote from Magnus. He says, ethanol has been known to cause damage to the engine and fuel system, while gasoline helps protect these vital components. With ethanol, you need to worry about fuel separation and water contamination because ethanol absorbs and attracts water. If the vehicle sits for any amount of time, the problem can become severe. Additionally, ethanol is a form of alcohol, which leads to corrosion in the fuel system. Over time, the plastic and metal components can start to rust, crack, or become deformed. He also says, gasoline has been the go-to choice for energy production in vehicles for decades. It's known to perform well and is created to protect the engine from wear. Gasoline provides a proper amount of lubrication for your vital car parts. If you don't want to deal with expensive engine or fuel system repairs down the road, gasoline provides the best insurance policy. He also says, ethanol doesn't handle water the same way gasoline does. When too much water is present in the fuel, it can cause adverse reactions to the sophisticated systems of a vehicle. Considering that ethanol is a great solvent, it can easily dissolve rubber, plastic, and fiberglass. With all these materials included in the modern vehicle, it can be a recipe for disaster. So this helps me understand why in Minnesota, aircraft and watercraft and other certain vehicles, they don't let you put ethanol in the gas. They have to use just regular gasoline because it damages them. You don't want to be in an airplane and have the engine go out and you crash and die because your engine failed because you're using ethanol. Let's see. Bell Performance also had a quote, inevitable steps taken by the federal government toward 15% ethanol content should move more and more states toward becoming mandatory ethanol states. This is despite the complaints of consumers over low gas mileage and two-cycle engine damage. The Jeep manual even talks about this. In the Jeep manual, it says, do not use E85 in non-flex fuel vehicles, which the Jeep is. Jeep also says, do not use E85. Gasoline containing methanol or gas containing more than 15% ethanol. Jeep is saying, don't use E85. They're not saying you can't use 10% ethanol, but it seems if 15% is bad, why is 10 not bad? I don't understand that. My conclusion, the winner is gasoline. They win this argument resoundingly. Engine fuel system protection goes to gasoline, and I had no idea that this was a concern. Number 3, from a cost standpoint, overall cost, which is better, gasoline or ethanol? First quote I have from you, again, is from Magnus, and he says, cost of ethanol is much cheaper in areas where it is produced. Even in areas where ethanol isn't created, it's often cheaper than comparable gasoline. However, this cost must be evaluated by the other factors we discussed. While you might pay less at the fuel pump today, how much more frequently will you be filling up due to reduced mileage, and how much damage will you have to pay to repair later? Russell Hubich says, it can cost less to drive on high fuel ethanol when the price of oil is high. That makes sense. That could be a spread there. Department of Energy says E85 is typically cheaper per gallon than gasoline, but slightly more expensive per mile. Dan Edmonds has another quote when he compares E85 to regular gasoline. He says, if an E85 pump is just 10 miles out of the way, thus requiring a 20-mile round trip, you're looking at a $4 to $5 premium just to get to the fuel. And then Russell Hubish says, ethanol has 34% less energy than gasoline per gallon, which equates to about 2 to 3 miles per gallon for E10. That's 10% ethanol. So keep that in mind. He says equates to 2 to 3 miles per gallon. And I'm going to do a little number crunching here and see how that would potentially affect my mileage in my Jeep Rubicon. I put together a couple spreadsheets here to show the miles per gallon that I'm currently getting of 13.8. What I'm doing is comparing it to what Russell says, where I can get 2 to 3 miles per gallon more if I use gasoline versus ethanol blended gasoline. So my chart here says 13.8 is what I'm currently getting on average. If I can get 2 miles per gallon more, it would be 15.8, and 3 miles per gallon per more would be 16.8. I have a 22-gallon tank in my Jeep, so that's consistent throughout them. And you can see here in this picture that the cost per gallon of gasoline last week in Minnesota was $3.499 for 10% ethanol and $3.899 for gasoline. So the total cost to fill up a tank of gas in my vehicle with ethanol is $76.98. And if I had used gasoline, it would have been $85.78. So on the surface, it looks like I would save $8.80 by buying the ethanol gasoline, which is exactly what people are saying here in these quotes. However, at this miles per gallon of 13.8 and 22-gallon tank, I can only go 303.6 miles. If I were to use gasoline, I could get 15.8 miles per gallon or 16.8 miles a gallon, which equate to either 346.6 or 369.6 miles, which is a total of between 44 and 66 more miles with gasoline than ethanol. I also wanted to determine the cost per mile. So the cost in dollars to fill a 22-gallon tank, as you know, is $76.98. And for gasoline, it's $85.78. Well, the number of miles driven is different, and it comes out to the cost per mile with ethanol is $0.2536 per mile, whereas the cost to use gasoline is less at $0.2468 or $0.2321. So a little bit less cost per mile using gasoline. Then I took those numbers and said, well, what if I drove 350 miles? How much is we talking here? At 350 miles traveled, the cost saving using gasoline is $2.37 or $7.51. Then I took a look at, on an annual basis, if someone drove 15,000 miles a year, how much is their cost savings? Comparing ethanol to gasoline, the gasoline cost savings would be between $101.68 and $322.01. So clearly, based on this information, it is cheaper to buy gasoline in the long run. The net is cheaper. Then I took a look at how many trips to the gas station would one make using ethanol versus how many trips using gasoline. The number of trips to the gasoline to get gasoline is 49 with ethanol, and with gasoline it's between 41 and 43. So clearly fewer trips to the gas station if you use gasoline. So as far as costs go, gasoline wins resoundingly, hands down. It is cheaper to run with gasoline than it is with an ethanol blend.
Number 4, easier to find. Which is it easier to find? A place to purchase gasoline or a place to purchase an ethanol blended gasoline? I found 2 articles on this subject, and the winner is, of course, gasoline. It still is much easier to find gasoline, and it certainly is really difficult to find E85 gasoline.
Number 5, environmental concerns. Which is better for the environment, gasoline or ethanol? Again, quoting Magnus, he says that gasoline creates more pollution. He says, quote, "The biggest drawback to using gasoline is how much pollution is created. Each year, the U.S. releases 1.7 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere just because of gas-powered vehicles. CO2 has a devastating impact on the environment. It has been linked to creating a warmer climate, rising ocean levels, and melting ice caps." And I agree wholeheartedly with all that. He also writes, with every mile driven, the ethanol fuel reduces emissions up to 30%. When you consider how much damage vehicles can cause the environment, this reduction creates a great impact. I agree with him there too. Dan Edmonds says, by relating our observatory fuel economy to CO2 emission figures found in the EPA's Green Vehicle Guide, again this is on his trip to Las Vegas, we determined that our gasoline round trip produced 706.5 pounds of carbon dioxide. On ethanol, the CO2 emission came to 703.1 pounds. The difference came out in E85's favor, but only by a scant 0.5%. Call it a tie, he says. This is certainly not the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions we had been led to expect. Now, this is E85, and I'm just looking at the 10% ethanol. That's got to be far less. If this is a tie at 85, what does it mean at 10% ethanol? Dan Edmonds also says, recent concerns have surfaced about the efficiency of ethanol production. Some critics have actually said that it is a negative energy source, meaning that more energy is required to produce ethanol than it delivers as a fuel. Further doubts have surfaced about the true benefits of ethanol and E85. Finally, Russell Hubish says, ethanol, burns more cleanly than gasoline, so it is much better for the environment. On the downside, growing, tending, and treating plants to create ethanol uses up considerable amounts of energy. By some estimates, the amount of energy used to produce ethanol is greater than the amount of energy ethanol ultimately ends up making when it is burned. Critics of ethanol believe that more efficient methods must be employed to make ethanol worthwhile and are especially skeptical about corn as a source of ethanol, since other types of plants like sugarcane and switchgrass can yield much greater amounts of biomass and therefore more ethanol. So a couple things here. When they use corn, they don't use the corn that we eat. They use the fiber parts of the corn. The main point here is, as you can see, ethanol compared to gas produces less CO2 coming out of the vehicle. What they're not plugging in is the cost to make the ethanol and what effect that has on the environment. And when you plug that in, if, like he said in here, it's a tie or it's on a scant difference, just coming out of the car, and then you plug in all that it takes to make the ethanol, I can't imagine that this is an environmentally sound decision. The winner of this for the environment is, I think gasoline wins this argument. E85 is only scantily better or even a tie when it comes to emissions. So what does that say about the 10% ethanol blends? Then it appears as though there's no consideration in these calculations for all that goes into manufacturing of alcohol and its effects on the environment and the amount of energy needed to produce ethanol. So again, the winner, surprisingly, I never thought this would be the answer, but the winner is gasoline. Number 6, foreign fuel sources. Which is better, gasoline or ethanol? Russell says, ethanol is a renewable source which reduces the need to import foreign oil. Agreed. Magnus says, the majority of gasoline used in the U.S. does not come from American sources, as ethanol does. In fact, he quotes, more than 57% of the oil we use originates from a foreign source. And his article is dated November 15th of 21, so it's just 2-3 months ago. So it's relatively recently. He's basically saying 57% of the oil we use originates elsewhere. Robert Rapier, however, says, the Energy Information Administration, EIA, tabulated U.S. energy consumption in 2019 and 2020 and determined that for both full years counting all energy sources, we were energy independent. So that really contradicts the previous comment. And I've heard that often, that we are energy independent. Also, Robert Rapier says, annual crude oil production generally decreased between 1970 and 2008. In 2009, the trend reversed and production began to rise. And in 2019, U.S. crude oil production reached a record high of 12.25 million barrels per day. More cost-effective drilling and production technologies helped to drive the production increases, especially in Texas and North Dakota. I think he's talking about fracking, at least as part of what he's talking about here. And that drastically changed things. And his article is recent too. It's November 14th of 2021, so just a day away from the previous one I had read you. I have to go. I'm hearing more and more that we are energy independent and we have the ability to not have to import foreign oil. As far as our dependence on foreign oil, the winner is we are not dependent on foreign oil. The winner is gasoline.
Number 7 is Renewable energy sources. So which is a better renewable source, gasoline or ethanol? And this is a no-brainer. I found 3 quotes and they all support ethanol. So the winner in renewable energy source is obviously ethanol.
Number 8, fluctuating prices. I'm going to put this one, I'm just going to go unknown because there's just too many variables here. So there's a quote here I got on the fluctuating prices, but it depends on the part of the country you're in and time, and I don't know if we can really accurately figure out what that is all about. I am just a regular guy trying to find answers. I went into this with an open mind and I am not withholding any information that would be helpful to either side of the argument. I have no allegiance to either point of view. I also realize that the cost of ethanol may be higher as there may be incentives and tax breaks that reduce the overall final cost, but as taxpayers, we are paying for it elsewhere, so there are hidden costs. Conclusion, which is better, gasoline or ethanol? Obviously, gasoline wins hands down. The data points lead me to this conclusion that gasoline is by far better in almost every category. It's astounding. I did not think this would be the results. I believe that blending ethanol with gasoline is 1, adversely affecting my miles per gallon, 2, harming my engine, 3, more costly in dollars per mile, 4, causes more frequent trips to the gas station, including idling and all that, and 5, it is not proven that ethanol is more environmentally safe. In fact, I suspect the opposite. I plan to do a little follow-up video after I convert to using 0% ethanol blended gasoline, in other words, real gasoline, and I'll report the results. I am not going to perform a real scientific study. I'm simply going to switch out of ethanol blended gasoline and use regular gasoline and see if this changes my average miles per gallon. Going back to my original motivations, here's what I conclude. 1, the first point was not having to stop for gasoline as often. Go farther on a tank of gas. Again, gasoline wins this. Do not use ethanol blended gasoline. You will go farther without it. Number 2, help the environment. I'd love to do my part, but I am not seeing evidence where ethanol blended gasoline is better for the environment than regular gasoline. Number 3, no financial harm to corn farmers. I don't know the impact and I don't want to see them hurt, and I am willing to pay more for my food if that income is needed to make sure the farmers stay whole. They feed the world, they feed our country. I love them and I don't want to see any harm come to them. Number 4, pay less in fuel costs per mile traveled. Use gasoline is my recommendation. Do not use ethanol blended gasoline. You will pay more per mile using ethanol. Perhaps all of this is a moot point once electric cars become more practical. If you have any comments or want to add anything to this on either side of the argument, please go ahead and leave a comment on here. I'm interested in learning more. This is the research that I found. I went online and I just grabbed the first few things I had, and I've not favored one side or the other. So if you've got some more information, I honestly would like to hear it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like my video, and please check out the other videos I have on MikeOverlanding. Thank you.